Hey all, in today's video we're going to dive a little into how sim racers, good sim racers in particular, pros maybe in particular, are using their various senses, and we are going to focus on your ears, which means on sound. Probably 10 years ago, so I had a presentation in school around that, so it kind of rings a bell, brings back some memories here. Um, and audio is kind of special for humans because it's the only sense you can't really shut down without plugging something in, so you can't just decide not to listen. But of course your brain subconsciously has a huge capability to ignore everything or a lot that does not give you any information, right? So like we live rather close to the highway here, so there's a constant like white noise in the background, but after a couple of days you stop hearing it. And the same is probably true if you live in a big city. There's background noise all the time. But sooner or later, your brain starts to kind of filter that out and focus on what is important. And sim racing really is no different there. In the game, there's a plethora of different sounds and noises and whatever, but only some actually deliver information. And this is what we're going to dive into today a bit. So let's maybe just do a couple corners with normal settings. All right. So let me just start driving. Don't listen to anything particular. Just this is going to sound like your ACC sounds, right? And so we go through the corners. We have the engine. We have the curbs. We hear the ABS kicking in there. We hear a bit of the tire scrubbing. Right, so this is what you know in ACC. So for this experiment, let's go to the audio options first. And I tested this before just to be sure we're going in the right direction here. And you already see, and a lot of pro players already had videos around that, we crank up the tires, right? Because that gives us information. And now we're just going to take that one level further and actually turn the engine off, which should give us a chance to hear the tires in isolation. So how about that? Just giving you a second here. Right, I know my shifting points in the M4, so I don't really need the engine sound that much. I would need it for like to judge wheel spin on the rear, for example. But I'm fairly good to just drive by speed alone, speed perception. But more importantly, the tires give me a good feedback of how fast I can go. Actually, that was a noise in the background that I immediately need to shut off, so let's keep going. So now we only have tire noise available, right? And I have Popometer running because we have a couple channels that give us information about tire slips, so we're going to try this too. I'll start with a little swerving left and right. Right, you hear how the tire builds, or the noise builds. And then we speed up a bit, and now I'm going to try to go too much, okay? So now I think you can see there are like two different noises. One being just a little slight tire scrubbing, just an indication the tire is doing some work. It's kind of trying to force the car around the corner. But then if you do it too much, like this, then a squeal noise is added on top. And what we want to find in this video kind of is how much noise is the good noise, which noise is the good noise, and what's the noise we want to focus on that gets us around the corner quickly, and how far we can really take it before we are doing damage rather than gaining time. So in terms of, for example, tire wear, or it could also just be a tiny bit of extra temperature. It doesn't really necessarily have to be increased wear. There's generally the game is quite tolerant to that, but of course if you were a typical bro steerer like our little friend Alan sometimes, but he's getting better, you will also see more tire wear on the front if you're constantly doing this and getting the loud tire noise, for example. Okay. So let me just do a normal lap and then to do 1 or 2 corners like the one before where we actually do too much, and then check in the data what the tire slip is actually telling us. And then we don't, in post-driving analysis, don't really need to go for the sound, but we'd have a representation of using the tire in the data as well. So that's still normal. Next corner, I'm just going to completely overdo it. And then we see how much slip the tire is actually producing. Let's do this one more here, just way too much. That's the noise I guess we don't want. And then a normal one. And then we're already through the lap. So let's have a look at the data, shall we? So I'm moving over here. I think this is the button that brings up the browser. We should have 2 laps recorded here. When I refresh the page, yes, that was a 149 was the last one, and the lap before was even, let me actually check, 136. Okay, so that one is still loading. So we go with the lap where I did the slalom before. Okay, this is what we're going to look at. Let's bring it up real quick. Loading shouldn't take too long. And with the Pro subscription on Popometer, you get the chance to choose from a lot of different data channels that are not available in Motec, for example, and are also not available in our free version of Popometer. So this is all what you get once you pay. And I chose to go just with the pedal inputs, the steering wheel, and the wheel slip on front and rear, just to kind of give you a match to the sound here. So we passed turn 1, 2, and then we did the slalom, I think, on the back straight. So here you can see it in the line. If we just go to turn 8, and we zoom out a little and go a little further forward in the data, there you can see the slalom. So initially, this slalom here, this was the slow one with a bit of steering input, but not too much. And here you can see the tire slip producing. No clue what ACC is throwing out there in terms of what this slip percentage means, but I think it's a value we can work with. And you can already see that where I overdid it with the steering on purpose, the slip values are much higher, especially on the front, but also a little on the rear here. Okay, so if we just do the normal slalom, you can see the slip values go to something like 1% almost on the front. And well, very similar actually on the rear. Additionally, you can see on the rear the outside tire, every time you do the left-right swerving, the outside tire produces a bit more slip than the inside tire, which is kind of makes sense. Or so I hope. Yes. So that is with the swerving, where the audio level was just the kind of the tire sounding like it worked, a tiny bit of scrubbing, but not the squealing. Right? And then if we move a little further in data, so this kind of second bit of the straight there, where we did way much steering, right? Before we did like 50 degrees left and right, and then we did 150 degrees left and right, so kind of full lock, what you can do. With the car, and that increased the slip angle on the front to 2.5, 2.6%. So more than twice as much as we were seeing before. Now, let's see if the lap afterward is uploaded by now, which I think should have happened. There it is. So let's load that up. And there were a couple corners where I was on purpose overdoing it with the slip angle. So let's just quickly look at turn 1 here on that lap. Everything I kept kind of normal there. And you can see at normal driving, the slip angle on the front, kind of just you go over the curb, you go over the sausages. So there's quite a good amount of variation there in the signal. But you can see that the peak we are achieving in the corners is somewhere like 1.2, 1.4%, maybe a peak here, 1.6. Maybe we're jumping over the curb there. The car lands, regains the grip, takes a moment of time. On power, you can see the rears are fighting for grip there, especially when going over the sausages, right? On the inside there of turn 2. So these are like spikes that we get when the tire is maybe up in the air, then lands again, tries to grip back up. That's when we see the spikes in the data. And equally, when the tire loses touch with the ground, you can see there's a 0 in the signal as well, which makes sense. If the tire's in the air, there's no slip. So then we go further, and then I think we had a couple corners, like, let's check 4 to 6. I don't think I was overdoing it there. So front and rear, 1.2, 1.4%, bit of slip on the rear here. But again, going over the curb, so that makes perfect sense. No extreme values here. If we ignore the spike, we're still around the 1.5% mark, okay? So if we then go to turn number 7, where I on purpose cranked the wheel a bit, you can see it here in the steering angle looking almost 180 degrees, just to give you that idea. And suddenly you can see we get a much bigger spike in the data, very close to or around to 2% of slip. So that kind of seems to be near the maximum we are able to produce here. The rear was very much in place. Of course, if you steer so much, you rather get understeer. So that is the thing you're going to see in the data. The rear stays planted, not a lot of slip. The front understeering, having higher slip percentage. This is also a way how you can, if you compare with a pro driver, can see if his car is over or her car is over or understeering. If the slip percentage on the front is bigger, it's understeer. If the slip percentage on the rear is bigger, it's likely oversteer. Did we have another corner where I was overdoing it? I think in this one I deliberately kept it clean, so slip is well below the 2% mark. And then we went into the last section where we tried to stay calm in the fast right-hander, which is here on Misano. So the front is around the 1.5%, rear is around the 1% mark, but then we kind of threw the car into the hairpin there. And then you can see the slip again on the front tire is going well over 2 point something percent, and the rear is going up 1.6 up to 8 or something like that, where we are creating a lot of slip. Then the last two turns, well, we have 14 here, right? So they're always trying to stay clean into 14. Still a lot of slip there. And then in the last corner, I don't know, it was different, right? We had turn 14, I overdid it with the steering. You can see 150 degrees is not a normal steering angle for this one. So the front understeering again, around the 2% mark. That seems to be what the car is producing. Let me know in the comments, if you play around with this, what other cars actually do. Because I have no clue, just sitting here, what the Porsche does, what the Aston does, what the Lambo does, Ferrari does. Could be really interesting if the cars actually have different maximum slip percentages. Would be interesting to know. Not that we necessarily get smarter from it, but maybe we get ideas and go from there. And then the last corner, I kind of went back to normal driving. So the slip on the front tires is something 1.2, 1.3%. So what do we do with this information? I would say, and it's not just an ad for the tool, it kind of comes up while I was looking at this. My focus was around the audio here. What we can see is that there seems to be a threshold, something around 1.5, 1.6% or so of slip, where the audio levels in the game change. If you are in the normal area of where the tire is still being used to a considerable good amount degree, where it still produces grip, we are talking about 1.5% of slip, there the audio level will still be kind of normal. You get a bit of scrubbing noise. It sounds like the tire is working. It's being kind of what do you call it, is being bent and snaps back into position, and just you're driving, right? And then you have the threshold where the additional squeal of the tire comes in. And this is also where we see much higher slip angles, more towards the 2% or even higher mark. Maybe do a burnout, complete the lap. Let me know what the percentages of those are. Feel free to play around with that. As I said, needs a subscription. But I think in terms of oh my god, analyzing your driving, the slip percentages here are much better, because I'm not entirely sure, if you watch someone's replay, if your audio levels are actually correct in that, and if you can really judge how much someone is using or abusing the tire already. So yeah, feel free to play around. with turning the engine off, just cranking the tire noise up just to get a feeling for that, what is actually possible. And then, yeah, write into the comments, subscribe, like, whatever you do on YouTube these days. And then we'll head on to the next video in a couple days with hopefully more Popometer features. Bye.